I'm Lucas Miller. I'm the CEO at Rust. Amongst other hats, I head up our West Coast operation in LA. I think mostly my job is keeping things on the rails and herding cats and fighting over typography and designing games around fighting quadrupeds and the like.
And I'm based here in Bristol, so doing project management. I mean, technically, my business card says bureaucrat and designer, so taxes and contract negotiations when I'm not designing stuff.
Sorry.
So Rust is a studio based in Los Angeles, California, and here in Bristol. We've been working in games, virtual reality, and other playful media since about 2010-ish. We do a mix of consulting, content design, independent projects. So this talk is going to touch on a lot of that. So the work that we're talking about is going to span most of those sort of various fields.
Oh, sorry. So to kick it off here, so our first sort of traipse into virtual reality was a game called Museum of the Microstar. And it started off as a non-VR game. It was a tech demo that satirized other tech demos. And so it kind of told the story about Earth going through many power failures and always framing it as sort of this thankfully, because of this thing, we got to try this other new source of power. And so this was all part of a contest that Unity sponsored. And we ended up, winning the contest and displaying a whole bunch of new DirectX 11 features. And so shortly after this was done, Oculus had their Kickstarter, and we, jumped on that. We got some of the first units, and very quickly ported it to its VR version.
Yeah, and so we'd had at various points, like a lot of our mentors and other people had done previous iterations of VR stuff, so we were sort of excited about it, but this was right at the beginning of the sort of HMD-based VR, sort of commercial VR ecosystem, and so if we're being honest, this was a sort of nauseating mess of it's a pretty experience, it worked great on the screen, but we didn't have any of those best practices or any of that stuff too, so you got pretty queasy if you navigated the whole experience. So that sort of really reinforced to us that if you need a design for the specific medium and that there are different rules in each of these cases and you can't just sort of dump something onto a new platform there. It also was a big move towards, the VR version got way more press and way more attention from lots of people than any of the other projects up until that point, and so that sort of kicked off a lot of the work that we did over the next couple of years there. This was a lot of attention, a lot of interest from people. So we started getting sort of client emails that read something like this. It said, we don't know if this is possible, but here's what we want to do. And so we'd get to sit down, and these were a real blast to do in a lot of these cases. So sometimes it'd be we have new hardware, or we have new software. Sometimes we want to take this content and bring it to a new market or a new audience in our existing market. And so it's a real fun space to work in as designers and recovering media scholars of various stripes. So this was one of the first projects that we did there. So this wasn't an HMD-based, sort of head-mounted display-based project. Shooting Blanks, virtual shooting range, they're based in Sydney, Montana. And so they had a setup that was a big screen, and they had a bunch of real-world firearms that they then modified. So they took CO2 recoil systems in them and lasers in the barrels. So the upshot was that you could do this shooting range, with targets moving and that stuff, but you could have, in theory, the hardware supported up to 5 different people sort of standing there. So this was multi-user without all the fun of multi-user stuff with none of the hassle of networking and other rigmarole as we've seen here. And this was also our first big dive into the attractions industry here. This was in the games world, and we'll touch on this more later, but generally the longer the better. The longer it is, the more valuable it is. In this case, they're worried about throughput and whatnot, so they're yep, we wanted exactly this many minutes because that's how long our other experiences were, and we know that works from and this was also nice and easy because we didn't really need much of a tutorial because these were using actual real-world firearms. They're they had a non-virtual shooting range attached to their building too. These were people that knew how all that stuff worked, and they're like, oh yeah, like I got it there. We didn't need to teach them anything. So that was a real nice easing into that process.
So this was sort of our next big commercial VR thing that we were working on. So this is a product from a company called Mediamation. They're based in just south of LA, and their shtick is 4D cinemas. So the moving seats that also blow air at you and pump out smells and shake you and everything. So they approached us to do an R&D project to see if we could cram a VR experience on top of their moving platforms to turn it into a gaming peripheral. They were building their commercial hardware at the same time that we were designing the API and the SDK to talk to their hardware. It was explicitly R&D, but they had decades of experience in the attractions industry, and we had the design and content chops to be able to make them work together. Like any project, it had challenges. In this case, it was finding a way to pump live physics data to n plus 1 computers. So we had 2 full VR capable computers per player, and then a additional VR capable machine of running the physics and making sure that they were synchronized across all of them.
That was for version 1. For version 2
Yeah.
was that you could duplicate that as many times as you wanted.
Right. Yeah. So somewhere in the future there may be a warehouse that has 201 computers. And then also in addition to this, because I don't know if I mentioned this, but the platform that they were building for this was a gutted out all-terrain vehicle. So we had to implement custom controls into an object that people were already familiar with. So the steering wheel was an obvious one, but how do you mount on a cannon onto an ATV, for example, is a question that we had to figure out, and then design the interface for those.
Cool. Yeah. So those are both contract projects. Throughout this time, we've been doing our own independent projects, which is sort of where the thread picks up here. So we released Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades. So this came out beginning of last April. So it was a HTC Vive launch title, and it's been in early access since then, probably till the end of this year at least. And so it's a sandboxy, sort of physics-based sandboxy game with lots of grilled meats, lawn games, and ordnance of various flavors. And so this was like a way different sort of project than a lot of the other ones. Like this had all of the stuff that made the other ones good arcade projects. This one was the opposite of that. First off, it's really hard. Like it takes a while to get and to learn how to do that. Because we're still in early access, we haven't built any tutorials, we haven't built any instructional materials. Our quick start video on YouTube is 40 minutes long. And that was like, okay, that got you the basics. Like now you'll be ready to start there. Which, for the home market, that was fine. Like people, we have these enthusiasts that would dive in and spend hundreds of hours playing the game, and it did really wonderfully. But as we've been releasing and putting out regular updates, we keep getting approached by people who want to bring this to an arcade. And we knew, this is not good for an arcade. You're not going to, you can't, there's no good 5-minute version of this game. And so, so we actually, relatively early on, started planning for what we could bring to the out-of-home market there. But yeah, the Steam version was definitely not suited to the 3 to 5 minute format.
Yep. So the way we started combating that was building a spin-off called MEATS, which stood for Modular Environment Adaptive Target System, sort of our backronym there. So this is just a single game mode within Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades, which attempted to kind of wrangle in some of the things that made H3 a bad arcade game. So what we were aiming for was a playthrough of various target sequences, which were somewhere in the 30 to 60 second range, so that a player may be able to play 1 to 3 rounds or so before they get cycled out for the next person. Also, the addition of certain things like unlimited ammunition for certain modes, reduces the amount of onboarding that a player would have to do. You know, we could dish the 40-minute video and so just hand you a controller and it's got a trigger on it, so you're pretty sure you know how to fire a gun from that point.
Yeah, which was a big sort of step aside. Like a lot of the simulation of the other game was like super realistic. Like, okay, you can take individual bullets out of the magazine and manipulate each of the parts of the gun, and you know the most detailed grenade mechanics I think I've ever encountered in that. Like,
Yeah.
And that one. So a lot of this was like giving, in this case, arcade operators the chance and a lot of settings to basically turn off or sort of dial as much of that on or off as they want.
Right.
Right.
So just gonna move forward a little bit.
Yeah, and so it's probably worth sort of, that's a lot of our background. We'll touch on a couple of those projects as we go forward here. But it's worth talking about what we sort of see the difference between like consumer VR versus attractions industry or the out-of-home market there. So you sort of got, on the consumer side, this is for non-commercial use and use in-home. So the person who's going to be playing the game buys a copy of it and plays it, you know, their friends and stuff might. In the attractions market, the person who's buying your game then charges other people to play your game. So that's like, it seems like a minor difference, but it actually makes a whole different set of concerns there. So in this case, you've got, so in some cases like arcades would be an example of this, like gaming cafes, family entertainment centers, like all those sorts of places. Those are places where they would pay for your experience and then charge somebody else to play it.
Right. And so kind of getting into some of the differences that you see between the two of them. You know, when we're looking at commercial, our art attraction industry uses of VR, you know, the environment in which someone is seeing your game is totally different. You know, in-home, you know, you're competing with, you know, the other 600 games that the person has purchased. You know, half of those they haven't even touched. So sort of, you know, convincing the player that, you know, this thing is something that you should pick up as opposed to those other ones is you know, has its own set of concerns there. But when you're working in the attraction space, you know, you have, you know, roller coasters, you know, go-karts, pinball, laser tag, all sorts of things making noises and flashy lights all around you. So, you know, trying to think of ways to, you know, compete with the sensorially intense environment. So finding ways to, you know, throw spectator cameras onto it, or, you know, loud music or other things that, you know, you don't need to think about when you're just building this out for someone's living room.
Or sometimes just bad idea, like, oh, that music would make this game horrible.
Yeah, that would drive people crazy. But you know, getting that earworm in the attraction space is important.
Cool. So then, in terms of like what your users are in the, it's worth sort of thinking about who your target demographic is, as it were. And so on the consumer side, like while not everyone would identify as a sort of a gamer in that case, that's a disproportionate sort of part of your demographic there. So these are people who are the early adopter types. They're very tech literate. They've got disposable income. Like you're sort of, like those are the people who have this hardware for consumer use there. Whereas in the attraction space, it's like anyone in the family might be there. So this could be families with kids and adults and stuff. Some venues are catering to like drunk college students, or and then you've got in other markets you've got, say like the gaming cafes. They have their own sort of subculture, and which is not one that I was terribly familiar with before I sort of dove into the industry. So that was so like figuring out what's going to appeal to each of those and what their tolerance is for how many games have they played, how much money do they have, how much time do do they want 5 minutes of entertainment or do they want 20 minutes of entertainment? And so it's not, in designing for those, you need to know what the difference between your sort of markets are.
Oh. So yeah, speaking of differences, when we talk about hardware, with consumer you have fairly standard interfaces. You can kind of expect a certain range of specifications that any computer is going to have as a necessity of that hardware. In the attraction industry, it only needs to work on a set of specialized hardware. In fact, it might only work on one computer. One specific build-out of computer.
We have had cases where it needed to work on that computer right there.
Right. Anything else didn't matter but that one, as long as it's running on that one. Yeah. So and then in addition to this sort of finite targeting that you have with attractions VR, we started to see custom hardware. So, like for example, the gutted ATV, or we've had other instances of custom controls as well. In the consumer world, custom hardware means fragmentation. It means that you sell fewer copies. In the attraction world, custom hardware is the thing that brings them in. I can't fit an ATV in my living room, so going to this location to ride that is a huge plus.
Yeah, and then you've got but the downside is that if it's custom, it's probably undocumented, or at best underdocumented, and you've got it's its own sort of development hassles there.
Yeah, so making sure that you're locked in early on.
So in terms of playtime, this was one I sort of mentioned a little bit earlier, but in the consumer world, the more content, the better. The more content, the longer your experience is, the more sort of entertainment minutes per dollar you've got, and so a 40-hour game is going to be, you can sell for more money than you can a 20-hour game than you can for a 10-minute game, because you're sort of selling to the end user there. In the attraction space, the people who are buying a game are the operators, and so they want engaging gameplay, and they want people to keep coming back, but importantly, they're worried about throughput, which is how many people can they get into and out of this experience in an hour. And so if you've got a 2.5-minute one, that's going to be better than a 3-minute and not as good as a 2-minute, balanced against having sort of compelling gameplay, so price-wise. So that, so we sort of think of these big epic experiences on the consumer side, whereas in the out-of-home, you want, more a short story or a sort of short blast experience there. Cool.
So when we're talking about game design, we have the term skill floor, skill ceiling. Skill floor is the minimum amount of skill you need in order to jump into a game. Skill ceiling is how much a player's familiarity with the game is going to benefit their gameplay, or how quickly a player can master the game. So on the consumer side, a skill floor can be anywhere. We said we have a 40-minute video that you have to watch in order to jump into it. But on the attraction side, you need it to be as short as possible, because the less time it takes for a player to get into a game means the more people you can get into it. The more people you can get into it, the more money you make. Whereas with the skill ceiling, having the skill ceiling doesn't actually matter too much on the attraction side, because you have all these other things competing with your attention.
Yeah, and so the last sort of bit here on business models, these two are industries that work very differently. They have different schedules, they have different sort of rhythms of how business happens there. So on the consumer side, it's this sort of widget commodity model. Great, I buy a copy of the game, I pay £20 for it now, and then I own it forever, and it's and so if you want to make more money, you either need to sell more copies of it, or you need to DLC or microtransactions or something like that. Whereas on the attraction side, this is a tool that they're using to make money. You're used to paying ongoing licensing fees, which can be great. You get this sort of ongoing revenue, but they have a much higher expectation of support. It's one thing the game doesn't quite work and it crashes in this one mode. They're you can deal with a lot of that on the consumer side and not have it be a problem. On the attraction side, that's money that they're not making. That's downtime, and that becomes a real problem for them.
Cool. So I think we're going to skip the recap. We'll be around. Feel free to snag us at any point if you have any questions. Our contact info is here. And thank you so much.
Yeah.